Welcome to the Strength Coach Experience podcast. I'm your host, Joe Lego, and here we go. Welcome, everyone, to the Strength Coach Experience, episode number 29. Today, I want to welcome back Tony Ricci once again. Third time's a charm. Tony, thanks for coming on once again. Everything's been great. And today, we really just wanted to dive into the scientific stuff, the neural pathways and the neurochemicals of the brain that kind of tie into what we spoke about in episode 26, because we did speak about how the training effects are, how that affects the athletes. But today we wanted to come back and really dive into the chemicals, how they're released and how that affects the body. So let's just get right into it, and we'll start talking about some of those chemical processes that kind of align with what we talked about in episode 26.
Yeah, well, it was great and good to be back, Joe. We're having a lot of fun here. I mean, there's so much to discuss, and the thing about sports psychology too, or if you're talking in terms of mental performance, is we don't know that much yet, right? We know there are some strategies that work and we utilize them, but in terms when you start talking about more of the neurobiological side, there are so many complexities there. And I think the first thing we need to know, as we talk about like neurotransmission and some of the things that go on in the brain, I think the first thing we should understand too, right, is that in order for mental performance or sports psychology to work, there has to be a baseline within the athlete that things are going pretty well. And what I mean by that is, you're not going to jump into a plyometric routine or a strength routine or power or speed routine if your athlete just had severe ACL injury or reconstruction. Well, in terms of mental performance, sports psychology, and neurotransmission, we do want to make sure, too, that there's no underlying neurobiological issue before we try to make some changes in an athlete's mindset. So, for example, some people do have in their athletes, they have a clinical anxiety. That's real, right? They have a clinical depression. That's real. They have a hyperarousal sometimes before sport, or they have a very specific condition that brings about anxiety. And my point to all that is, in terms of neurotransmission, those are things we would like to first be able to identify, Joe, before we even think, hey, I got to work with this athlete and I'm going to cure the fullest extreme of anxiety. No, if there's a clinical situation, because that's controlled by serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline, those neurotransmitters, right? It's either controlled by them or their lack thereof. So certainly I'm no expert in those clinical disorders regarding the neurobiology. But what we do know is that neurotransmitters very often can be dispersed improperly or distributed improperly. Too much serotonin in one part of the brain, or the reuptake is too much, okay? Maybe there's not enough of a dopaminergic release. And so my point is to start out of the box. There are a lot of complexities. If somebody has any type of clinical condition due to neurotransmission, then they go to the experts first, right? That's why a lot of teams hire a clinical sports psychologist, because that person can handle both a potential health issue or clinical mental health issue that has to be addressed, and then potentially provide some augmentation in performance. But the setup right now with a lot of, maybe even in the military is doing this, and pro sports teams have a clinical psychologist at the top and a mental performance coach is working under their auspices. So I think it's really clear to know there's an old saying, you got to be in shape before you can start training. Same thing with our brain, right? We want to make sure, hey, things are going pretty good for the athlete first. There's no really drastic family problems. They're sleeping pretty well. They don't have a history of a potential mood disorder that needs to be treated by a specialist. And once we can see that, then we can start talking in terms of, okay, can we actually change thought processes, cognition, which in turn certainly would, to a large extent, change neurotransmission, right? And how do we think? How do we process? And everything along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that's still kind of in the woods, if you will, with training is people still don't want to go through those things, or they don't have the means to get people checked out in those situations, because as a strength coach, I feel like a lot of people just want to get to the weights, and we've talked about it before, and get things going. But if you have an athlete who's a mental disaster, and not in a negative way, I just mean a lot of stuff going on in there. And we talked about the chemicals aren't lining up right. They're not released. They're not balanced. We have to make sure that those things are at a level where either, they're stable or that somebody is helping them, because if you have out of whack, if your dopamine receptors are out of whack, if your serotonin's not working, or maybe you're high in cortisol because we have, we're a stressor, we're stressing about different things, you're putting stress with exercise. There's always that. I think that the wellness of exercise and feeling good and the sports performance part gets intertwined. And I think they need to stay separate. If you sit at your house all day and you don't do anything, and then you go to the gym and you're depressed, at a lower level, and now we go to the gym, we can help up the dopamine receptors and the serotonin and lower that cortisol. However, when you go to a gym setting and you're killing yourself 3 times a day, or whatever your training session may be for whatever sport, but now you have those same issues, or they're there, now we have a whole different level, because we're constantly towing that rope between we're going to release cortisol and overtrain, and this is as much as we can possibly do to push the limits. Yeah. And I think it's because we're at the top of the hill, if you will. A little bit more, they fall over. Not enough, they're not gonna progress because at the level. And I think that's a great point that you bring up. The balance of those chemicals is so important because of the level at which the athletes, right? The higher the level of athlete, I think, the more susceptible they are to get those chemicals out of whack.
Yeah. First of all, wonderful point that you made. And that is, we know there's great research now, right? There's a scientist by the name of Blumenthal from, I believe he's UNC or Duke. Forgive me, Dr. Blumenthal, but did wonderful research.
Both good colleges.
Exactly. Wonderful. Yeah. But they won't take that. Yeah, well. Right?
Exactly.
But wonderful research on the impact of exercise and how it lifts mood. And you say that, and it is wonderful, but that's in the context of what you just said, really health, right? To help somebody. And when we talk about these, what, I don't even like the word disorder, but that's how they're classified. This is not alarming. We all have had times in our life first where we were clinically too anxious, clinically maybe a little down. So these are legitimate issues. But your point, well taken too, is that there's a big difference to go for a brisk walk or utilize a stationary cycle in the general population. So it increases the efficacy of neurotransmission, may help elevate mood. That's wonderful. But the athlete, almost everything they do is competitive. So it is a completely different stressor. So if they're lifting with you, to your point, or with a strength coach, and not meeting goals and objectives, and there's a pre-existing struggle there, it may not augment it at that point. You may fall short. Their focus may not be there. The session may not go the way they want. So no doubt, and we're not here, as performance coaches, to be able to fully diagnose someone and know what an issue may be, but certainly to refer out, right? If we see that, because the athlete's whole being and holistic health is important to the extent that they recover better, they cognitively process better, and they can learn better and continue to enjoy the sport. If those variables are not there, inevitably performance is going to be impacted too. So it's like anything else. Like if we think someone that we're working with may be struggling in a very complex issue, such as an eating disorder, we want to refer out. And the performance coach wants to help them, right? They want to help them jump higher, run faster. But the truth is that condition takes precedence, because if we don't take care of that first, nothing that we do is going to is going to really have an aggregate benefit, right? So that is where we come in as performance coaches. We don't diagnosing, we don't have to fully understand, but I do think we have to be attuned enough to know that our protocols in our discipline and our job isn't going to solve everything. And we made a look at the holistic health of the athlete first in some cases before we continue to go on. And I'll close on it that sometimes that's hard to do because you're making a living by training someone. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's fair. That's completely fair. So to send them away and refer them out, knowing they may be gone for a month, 2 months before they can help improve upon a struggle or an issue, it's a bold thing to do, but the proper thing to do.
Yes, and absolutely. And I understand that, we talk about the business and the money and how some things are difficult. And that's one of the harsh realities, right, of the private sector in the performance thing is most of the time, and I spoke about this yesterday on another episode that's coming out, where the problem is, and I agreed 100%, is people want to open a facility. So they buy a big shiny new warehouse with a bunch of shiny new equipment, but they have no idea how to get people in the building. And not to say that everybody does this, but and not that, this is not against anybody for making a nice gym and wanting things to be nice. But I think one of the problems with that is by time you open your doors, you have a $500,000 bill with no idea, because business is not something we learn or are taught in school, which I think should change. But you open your doors, we have no idea how to get more people in there. And then every single person is pretty much like a piece of equipment, right? Oh, good. We got another person. We could pay for the cable fly. We got another person. We could pay for the Vertimax.
Yeah, it gets weighed that way. You're right.
I think that, nonchalantly, it's not a purposeful thing, but sometimes we try to fix more than we can because we need that income coming in. And I think that's a kind of an issue with the private sector, because the business side isn't really talked about. Or if you don't work for a team or an organization and you try to go out on your own, all based on your region and not necessarily based on knowledge, especially now with social media, you're not able to generate the business that your knowledge is worth. And sometimes we end up doing those things where we have a kid that might need to go out on a retreat, go on vacation for a month, go see somebody and refer out. But now we're saying, well, I can do that, or I can keep my lights on. And I think that kind of pigeonholes some stuff. And then again, even with organizations, with fighting, time is time. If you're 6 weeks out and this person's supposed to fight, we talked about it, for $1 million, and if they don't fight, their purse now drops to 200,000. We have to make a decision. Is it worth it for them to go get, the mental health cleaned up? And obviously that's most important. Or can we push for another 6 weeks? And then I think the longer we prolong that, the athlete gets used to that state of depression, low serotonin, low dopamine, and it kind of snowballs. And I think that's what happens. You get somebody that feels down, and then it's not a big deal, right? Or I felt down, but that was because of some other external source. Yeah. And now I feel better. And then that kind of happens, like an EKG, and it kind of snowballs into an effect. And I think that's where most people get caught.
And it's understandable and it's delicate. Now, I do think something's important. Maybe, and again, we can only make our best assessment and consult with the experts in this. But maybe sometimes in the opposite, Joe, where the athlete is coming to you and it is one of their few things that they do feel good about and they are making progress with. But we still have to be attuned to, how do I keep this a positive experience, right? And we have to manipulate variables, maybe training frequency or exercise selection or load or just the total volume. So I think that we can be positive. It's not to say under a circumstance where there's a challenge or a mental issue or mental health issue proposes a challenge that we're automatically out. We may not be, because some people may come to you and go, you know what? Right now, this is the best part of my day. Practice is beating on me, or the volume, and I'm having a hard time. And yet when I come here with you, I'm making progress. So we could be augmenting the circumstance and be one of the few things the athlete can find refuge in which they are benefiting, and stay with them, because maybe they have to leave practice or training for a while to resolve this, but they can stay in condition with you. And to your point, you need some malleability there. You just need to be flexible and read the athlete, or almost some auto regulation. And you look at them and just know what they have in, or know what they may need to hear that day, or understand that, wow, I know he or she has not slept, they're overtrained. What is a protocol that will still help? But what are some things we can do today that will help augment their performance? And I don't have to go with a load, or I don't have to go with anything or a metrics that we're trying to reach. So just like in business too, like what you said it, what do? I open it up. Now, how do I make it work? I mean, it's a sense of ping pong, and you're going to be pulling one way, then pulling the other way. In physiology, we think health is the ability to be flexible, right? If your heart rate has to go to 180, you wanted to rush up to 180. If it has to come immediately down to 60, you wanted to be able to do that. That's an indication of health, being able not just to not be stressed, but adapt to some stresses. And as a coach, that's what we have to do. Adapt to the individual to a large extent, adapt to what they may have available at the time. And if we can mentally improve their state, improve their mental state, well, then we're still making advancements. It's not all measured in the load that was moved. It's measured in where they are, how they feel about where they are, and how they feel about where they can go. And that's where a performance coach can really help too, right? Instead of just measuring things, which we should. I'm an objective. People say I measure too many things. But nevertheless, I also have to have that ability to know how a touch and go, which is more of an art. What does the athlete need right now that may help them to either continue to progress forward mentally and physically, or where can we direct them to somebody who else may be able to do the same, and it's out of our capacity?
Absolutely. Couldn't agree. That balance that we talked about in the beginning, and we've talked about that balance of training and the awareness of your athlete is where this really comes to fruition, because it's not until you understand your impact, and not that it's good or bad, but until you have somebody that is having a rough day, or training is the best part of their day. But it's your job as a performance coach to identify this is now your thing. This makes them happy. And then we can kind of manipulate things to bring that mental attitude higher. Exactly. Yep. And I think that is why knowing the athletes and having that balance, but also that waltz that we talk about between the athlete and the strength coach, you have to be able to switch roles, because you have to understand, because that's what's best for them. If you constantly hammer on them, it's not going to work. But if you're always easy on them as well, if they have a bad day, that doesn't work either. It's a balance, because you have people that like to be, beat into the ground for having a bad day. That makes them feel better. And I think that constant balance is huge. Just before we get in any more, just for people out there listening, I just want you to go over just the big three chemicals we've been talking about: dopamine, serotonin, and cortisol, and maybe just do a small breakdown of those for everybody listening, not too familiar with those. And then we can kind of get into their effects on that auto response we talked about, and then carry on how that affects in training with the different things we've been speaking about.
Yeah, so these are, well, let's just first say that they're complicated, and they have many, many roles, and you got to put some time in, like a friend of mine, Dr. Jamie Tarter, the founder of Neurosports, to start speaking with great confidence about these transmitters or these hormones, because their roles are very broad and not all of them fully understood. Right. But serotonin, of course, is a primary neurotransmitter. And it's one example. And serotonin does come from a precursor, tryptophan, and can be converted into 5-HT, right? Which is serotonin. What is the role? It's multifaceted. First, what do we need? Well, let's talk one thing. Physical activity does likely augment the transmission and the efficacy of transmission of these neurotransmitters, right? So serotonin is multifaceted. We tend to say, oh, serotonin makes you relaxed. Serotonin, a serotonergic effect, calms you down. In essence, yes, but it's a lot more, multifaceted, because the body uses these hormones and neurotransmitters in multiple capacities, and it makes sense that it would. If you can take something, an enzyme, for example, and use it for multiple processes, you don't have to make a new one. So over the years, we've learned to evolve and use serotonin, the noradrenergic system in the brain, noradrenaline, the dopaminergic system in the brain, dopamine, which is, often affiliated with reward only. But again, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Here's what we know: that the brain wants these neurotransmitters to move with efficacy and efficiency in various parts, contingent upon demand, whether that's sleep, whether that's concentration, whether it's focus, okay, whether it's excitation. And so, most important, I would say, first for the athlete, is to know that the efficiency of these transmitters is highly contingent upon good diet. They know that. This is unequivocal. Sleep, because sleep is to muscular recovery. Sleep is to neurotransmission. There are waste products that go on in the brain when you're focusing and processing. So if that athlete is on the lacrosse field and they're in attack and it's a high intensity game and they're in overtime and they're passing and reading defenses and going back and forth, you're leaving waste products in the brain with serotonin, noradrenaline, with dopamine. So these things need to be treated like the body is, right? They're going to be produced. They're going to be utilized. They're going to go from a presynaptic, right, release to postsynaptic, where you release the serotonin, it goes to the next neuron. The more you train, the better you eat, the better your fluids, the better your sleep, and the better your mind state through mental performance and keeping positive mindset, the better these transmitters work. And the better they work with greater frequency. So I think in terms of them, I first like to look at, how do we treat them, right? How do we maximize their abilities? And they're maximized no different than the way we would maximize the human body, by taking care of ourselves and having a routine that includes the high fluid intake, the rest, the good diet, the training, and then the actual training of positive mindset. Because, for example, things such as negative rumination, right? Why are they so taxing? In a negative rumination, or some mood disorders, even in depression, what happens is you get a very limited ability to take neurotransmitters and disperse them to other parts of the brain, right? That's called, there's a reuptake issue. I'll explain. But nevertheless, my point is, what do? We ruminate on a given issue, such as negative rumination. I can't do this. I always fail at this. I'm afraid when this happens. And not only is that reducing the brain's ability at that given time to be efficient with neurotransmitters for other functions, it's really wearing down and stressing out those neurotransmitters in those set pathways. So where I'm going with this is as follows: serotonin, dopamine, okay, the noradrenergic, noradrenaline, and cortisol, as an example, are valuable. They all play a positive role if the condition is positive, if we create the better environment. Cortisol is another great example. People villainize it. It's an incredible hormone. It raises in the morning usually, and should. You've been fasting all night. It's going to free up some fatty acids. It may induce some gluconeogenesis for energy, right? It will maybe break down a little glycogen because you're low on food. They all have wonderful effects. The negative becomes if they are neurobiologically not dispersed properly and disseminated throughout the brain, as example, or if they're chronically utilized in an improper manner, such as the rumination in the brain, or if cortisol is chronically elevated because of the fact that we are stressed. So there's nothing in the human body that's bad. It wouldn't be there if it was bad. We'd get rid of it. Not if it's endogenously produced. People say cholesterol is bad. It is not. You'll die without it.
Mhm.
LDLs are bad. They're not bad. They're bad if they're disproportionately elevated compared to another cholesterol.
Yep.
Same in our brain.
Sickest people in the world have low cholesterol, right?
So
Some
good.
of the sickest people, yeah. If you have
Great point.
overly low, yeah.
Great point. So in terms of that, we're looking at, these are very important and complicated mechanisms, none of which even some of the best fully understand. But the athlete improves them by everything we said, and you and I have talked about. Sleep, that's number one. Your brain ain't recovering if you don't sleep. And one thing I'd like to make a point of very notable importance, and you learn when you sleep. And I kind of prognosticated that in the 80s when I was a very, very young trainer. And Dr. Jamie Tarter of the Science, the founder of Society of Neurosports, said exactly that. So if you're an athlete and you learn a new motor skill, or you're learning how to throw a new punch, you're going to ruminate on that during the day in a positive way. What did I do? How did I do it? Where were my feet? How did I turn the torso? Where was the target? When you sleep, those neural pathways are going to be created. They will be strengthened at rest, just like the muscle will, not when you're up, but when you sleep. So if you want all of these things to work properly, treat them properly, and you're at least increasing the chances of having these neurotransmitters and a hormone like cortisol do what they're supposed to do and maximize performance versus cause degradation because we have certain behaviors that are not creating a favorable environment.
Absolutely. And thank you for that wonderful explanation. I hope everybody listening jots that down. But I think, one of the things with those neurotransmitters is things are always labeled bad. This is bad. Cholesterol's bad. Sugar's bad. Nothing is bad if you use it in the right place. And I think that's a great point that you made, because especially with the neurotransmitters, right? Dopamine is great, but not if you blow out the neurotransmitter all the time. And that's what drug addicting is,
exactly.
Right? You're raising every time you do cocaine and methamphetamine, somewhere with those chemicals, we're raising that dopamine and you're overdoing it. And then what happens is you get to a level that's too high and your brain constantly wants that level higher and higher and higher. Yeah. And the addictive quantities of the drugs, that's what happens. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to be at a baseline of dopamine, a healthy line of dopamine, and it needs to go up and down. So I think it's either people get, this is terrible, cortisol is evil, and we shouldn't have it. If you didn't have it, you'd be dead in the morning. You wouldn't be able to move because you wouldn't be, there'd be no glycolysis. It wouldn't break it wouldn't oxidize anything in the liver. The same thing with the serotonin. Yes, we want to be calm all the time, but not all the time, right? It needs to, everybody listen, it's a balance. The Absolutely. Dopamine goes up, the cortisol goes down. The serotonin comes up, the dopamine goes down, and it's a beautiful balance of water lifting up and down. And I think one of the things is if something gets labeled bad, now all of a sudden we have it as terrible. Exactly. Or if you say, well, dopamine makes you is a reward. Well, we want to be feeling dopamine all the time. No, you don't, because then instead of identifying that we're going to be rewarded for the dopamine, and every time I do something really good, if you're rewarded every time, or you raise your dopamine every time you do anything, now we're kind of coming up with an issue where your body doesn't know what's right and wrong. And just to bring it up to your point, that's why this whole everybody gets a trophy thing in little kids sports is a bad idea, because I understand what they're trying to do and not make people feel bad. But if you're rewarded for everything you do, even if it's not good, now all you become is a dopamine hunter. And then you end up in these drug things. And I'm not tying, everybody gets a reward to being a drug addict.
Oh, no, I get it.
They're very closely related, because you're messing around with a neurotransmitter that your body, and just as Tony was talking about, your body knows how to regulate all of them. You come out with great regulation, and through society and work and worry and all these things, we kind of bang up that system. And until we learn how it works, that's how we kind of come up with that nice homeostasis. But to my point is that this is why the system of sport, or in general, getting a job, achieving a goal or not achieving a goal, failing, going through failure, setting goals and maybe not getting them to them right away, trusting processes, or having somebody tell you you're not good enough to play XYZ sport. It's not just a good thing because we want to have people that are A personality with dominance. We're teaching people how to live because that's how your body wants to live. You need failure and you need success. You can't just have success and happiness all the time, because then what happens is, if you've never experienced cortisol, you're constantly used to getting a reward. It's like a puppy with a treat. Once you take that treat away or something bad happens, now they're crushed. And they don't have the abilities to get out of that rut because they've never had to self-regulate that dopamine and serotonin.
Yeah, really good points. And I think it comes down to, even with things that I don't want to hear sometimes, a really eloquent sense of balance. And everything in the universe does that. Look at the tides in the world. Moon pulls them one way, they come back again. The orbits of a planet, right? They become further, closer, further, closer. There is this circular, if you will, or back and forth yin and yang that I think we should at least be cognizant of and appreciate, to your point, and not overemphasize one quality. So always shoot to succeed, but find the reward in when you fell short, right? Don't only focus on the rewards in falling short, and strive a little bit more to make sure you succeed with greater frequency. Some of the other points too that you brought up, I think, are very important. And that is allowing the brain to, and your mind to engage or be involved in many experiences, because then you learn how to re-regulate. And it is a problem, I do think. I think everyone should be praised for participation. Hey, good job. Okay, you can do better.
Absolutely.
I'm glad you're here. Great job, right? I don't have a problem with that. Now, if they fall short, I know you can do that better. I know you can. I've seen you do that better. But that doesn't mean it is always a trophy, for example. And there is something about the human spirit, to your point, where struggle does equal triumph. And unfortunately, I didn't write the rules, but there needs to be some of that. And we see that in everything we do. You struggle in a plyometric to get more power. You exert a little discipline to create in your diet to create a little bit of a caloric deficiency. You close your eyes to quell your mind in order to build a better mental state. So there is a in and out in a 4,000, 5,000-year-old yin and yang, if you will, that makes a lot of sense. Now, the problem with it is it's a lot more subjective, right, Joe? I mean, it's not easy to measure. When do we push the guy more or the woman more? When do we pull back? Even with ourselves. When do we pat ourselves on the back? When do we kick ourselves in the ass? Excuse my language. That's not easy. That's an art. That's challenging. So what we'd rather do is develop a coaching style that, is consistent. I'm not saying correct, but consistent, so that it's just easier to rely on. But my guess is the top coaches in the world have an approach. They have a philosophy, but that philosophy still has a couple of off-ramps in how to bring people back into it. So really good points here. And these are philosophical arguments as much as they are the societal arguments, and they're scientific ones. True. And just to that point, nothing in the human body is bad. What's bad? Imbalance. Sodium. Oh, how often have you heard salt is bad? You will be alive 9 minutes without salt in your body, right? No, it's not bad. It's wonderful. But 5,000 milligrams of sodium and 50 milligrams of potassium is bad. That's a yin and yang, right? That's everything you're talking about in the brain. The brain has trillions of cells that are like an ocean that flow here, then must flow there. And those neurotransmitters are what do it. We get in trouble if they're all flowing here. and very few are going there, right? So like the amygdala, the stress response. If you're always stressed, you're good at becoming stressed. And you know what? It's your preferred reaction. It's the path of least resistance. So, like you hear that, well, these people are high drama. Well, they probably train themselves to be high drama because the part of the brain that's highly reactionary might be taking over, and it's the easiest pathways to get to respond to something. So this is a really intense conversation about what looked at 5,000 years ago.
Yep. And to your point, bringing up all the stuff with the tides, it's always interesting that we talked about it with strength conditioning. We always try to get away from the things that have been established, right? The sun comes around every day. The planets come around every day, right? A forest catches on fire, burns to the ground, and it grows back. But for some reason with the human body, which is an organism that was comprised out of all this, we always try to fight everything.
Yeah.
Right? And to your point with the processes, that's what makes it hard, because if you're a person that goes to anger when that homeostasis gets knocked out of whack, it's very easy to read a book that says, well, you shouldn't be angry. But the main part and the hardest part is that's your learned behavior. And if somebody taught you that, that's what you're going to do. And until you find another way, or somebody comes along and teaches you that other process, you're never going to be able to find it. It's the same thing. We can talk about it in relation to strength conditioning, right? Going into cueing. I talk about this with IGDA all the time. We talk about how if you have an athlete and they're constantly in spinal flexion all the time, you can cue them all you want to get them into extension. But until you use an exercise that stimulates extension, they're never going to get there because they have never gone in there. Nobody's ever taught them, and they've never been forced to go in there. So unless you put them in there, they don't know. And it comes back to basic things, right? People that are angry, it's because they need to be loved. People that are it's that balance and it's that response. But to that point, if you've never been in that situation, or you've never been in that, let's just bring it back to strength conditioning in a movement, you don't know how. And I think that's always an argument that comes up. It's, well, it has to be on your cueing, or we're always looking for a discrepancy, an imbalance, an issue, a problem with an athlete, when in reality is, if you're a track runner and you have an anterior pelvic tilt, and you walk around with your butt raised up in the air, and that's how you are, that's not because you're broken. It's because everything that you've done and all the movements that you've done up to this point have caused you to have an anterior pelvic tilt, because that's how you're trained. And you can yell all you want about put your hip back, neutral hip, neutral spine, whatever you want to call it. But until you show them and get it back into there, there's no way to do that. And to bring that full circle into psychology, while you're training your athletes, you have to almost off-guardly put them in situations that will force them to be happy, sad, struggle, not struggle, take it off the back, right? There's always a time where you have coaches that are like, well, I don't want to get mad. And I'm like, well, you don't need to scream and yell, but there is going to be a day where you look at an athlete that you love to death and say, you're right, you can't do that. And if you can't do that, you need to get out of my gym. Now, we don't mean that fully, but some days we need to take that, that nice persona we have and give them a little bit more of a boost and force those things upon them. And that's why we talk about that dance, the flow of water, because we have to say, because you might have a kid that you get along with great, does everything you want, but one day you know that he can get up to 60 inches on a box jump, let's just say as an example, and you have to push him up there. And this could be the first time you've ever showed any type of aggression towards this person, but it's the abilities to do that, because what is that going to do? It's going to change that neural response we talked about. Different chemicals are re-responded, right? And then now in their head, it's, okay, well, I've never seen this before. We've been together for 2 years, but now if I can't get to 65 in a month and coach knows I can do it, he's going to push that button, and then my neurotransmitters are going to go out of whack. So I need to make sure that I have control over that.
That's right. Yeah. And we have a voluntary ability at some points to control, right, through cognitive processing, where we are going to direct, if you will, the neurotransmitters to cooperate with specific neurons, so we can change how we think and behave and create a pathway that's more consistent, like a positive way of thinking. a focused way of thinking. And again, to reiterate, I always go back to this because I feel sometimes there's an inherent assumption in sports psychology or mental performance that mental skill training, will overcome everything. No, when there's a pure neurobiological imbalance, such as a clinical depression, right? Exercise helps as an example in clinical depression. But the truth is, what it may do in concert with a medicine, help the medicine work better. So there are circumstances in which we can't make that change, but the majority of the circumstances we can. And we can help reroute how that person thinks. And if we can reroute it with greater frequency, like anything else, it becomes a more common pathway in which the athlete can access. So those neurons are roads. That's what they are. They're essentially roads. Some of them exist. Those roads exist already, but we've used other roads, hypothetically negative thinking, down on ourselves, don't believe in ourselves. So that road is to the right. And there's a road already there. It may need some paving. It may need a divider. Okay. It may need some, what do you call those lines to break the lanes up? But the road is there. And we have to get them on that road as a performance coach. And we can do that, eloquently. Okay, this wasn't your best day, but here's what we did do. Here's what we did do. Don't keep them on negative road only. This is not to say everybody gets a trophy, but the strategy in coaching is sometimes to find something positive out of what wasn't good. Now, to your point, there are going to be days, and if you don't yell all the time, and you do, they're going to listen because they're known they're going to be driven to that point. But what do we want to find? All right, well, this didn't go the way we wanted today. I've said that to athletes, exactly the way we wanted today. But here's what we got out of it. Here's what we did well. And here's what we're going to look to increase or perfect next time. And what we can do is pull them out of, hopefully, to an extent, the negative place that they may have gone and start getting them focused on something else that may be positive. It's no different if you watch a fighter and they're sparring and they're dropping their right hand the whole time. Okay? The coach is going to say, I bring that right hand up, or bring the right hand up. Every time you're striking or you get tired, that right hand's down, you're getting clipped. Fine. Now, how do we present that? Do we present that stop dropping the right hand only so that the focus is the right hand is dropping? Or, listen, you're close, okay? There was some good jabs there, all right? Your range was good, but you only got clipped because that right hand's dropping. So let's get that up. So we're reframing that, right? We're trying to find a different way for them to process, because if that athlete came in and said to you in advance, Joe, I'm always dropping my right hand. I never keep it up. I'm always dropping it. I'm never keeping it up. I don't want to tell them after the session per se, you're always dropping it. No, he knows that, or she knows that. So what do I do? I try to associate keeping the right hand up with other pathways and other methods of processing. Hey, right hand was down, but it was down after the jab, which is great. And your range is good on the jab, but that's where you're getting clipped with the hand down. So let's bring the hand up. Okay, let's keep working on that. If we do that, he ain't hitting him. If we do that, the kick's gonna work. So that's how we can reframe with our athletes. And that's not babying them. That's just getting them away. Remember, the pathway and the serotonin or whatever's driving it will just keep going. It's a path of least resistance. If there's a big hole here and a small hole and water's flowing, it's easy going to rush through the bigger hole. It's going to go through the small hole, but with much greater pressure. And it'll be much harder for you to redirect the water through the smaller pipe than the bigger pipe until you get the bigger pipe bigger, all right? Or smaller pipe bigger. So that's kind of how, if we can change cognitive processing and reframe it, we might reframe them out of things, or at least start that process that has been historically an issue for them.
Yeah, absolutely. That sandwich method a positive in the middle of a negative, or two positives on the outside, instead of saying things they already know, because most of the time they're thoroughly aware. And while you were answering this question, I just want to bring it up because I think it'd be a great point. When you have a fighter going into a cage, right, and they're about to kill the other person, what are some of the techniques or things you use in training, or that you can use to keep a person calm when their fight or flight response is at an all-time high? Or, to ask you, because I don't know, is the traits of a good fighter not being able to go into a situation like that and not be in fight or flight at the same level as somebody else?
That's a wonderful question. And I do think, just as it came back down to, you and I have talked about this, right? So physically, we would say all baseball players or all fighters or all gymnasts need certain biomotor qualities, but they possess them differently or use them slightly different. It is amazing that you'll see personality variation equally great. There are some people that respond optimally, and their mental state is created better in a sense of calm, okay, where they don't get they don't get too ignited. You'll see, I think somebody like, maybe in baseball, I think Jeter was like that. Derek Jeter was just talking to the kid before he's going to at bat with the bases loaded, right? Mm-hmm. And he would perform and just be very relaxed. And he seemed to have, and I don't know him, so I could be wrong, but certainly as far as play, his keel was very even, and that's how he performed optimally. There are other players that like I think I used to watch A-Rod. He was different, and he'd go up at bat, and you could tell he'd get a little anxious sometimes when the bases are loaded, and there was a different method of breathing going on, but his posture and his way of seeing the situation changed. Where, Jeter saw it this way, he saw it this way. And I think in fighting that happens. So what we have to find, as opposed to saying fight or flight is optimal, or being more calm than an area rug on CBD oil is optimal.
I like that.
Yeah.
You should make t-shirts.
Fighter like, right? And then helping them to get there. But what optimizes it? Obviously, experience, right? Experience. As a fighter or any athlete does something more and more, they say to themselves, I've been here before, and I've done my job. I've failed, but I've done it, and today we're going to have a good day. So readiness, and we talked about it in our previous conversations, readiness routines are vital. See, a lack of familiarity is a bad thing before a fight because you're distracted. And that breeds potentially uncertainty. Something new is uncertain if it's new. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a big threat, but it's uncertain, right? So what we want to do, readiness routines are very helpful. In better words, and you can't always design them perfectly in fighting because you may be the third fight on the card and then 3 knockouts in a row, but systematically, before every sparring session, wrap my hands a certain way, converse with your coach if he's there, do my shadow boxing routine, whatever it is 3.5 minutes. I do a full body activation with lower extremity. I say the following cues to myself. I try to write those out with fighters. What would you say to yourself? Have it. Take the time to be saying that. So have what we call a readiness routine that has optimized your performance in here so that it's comparable right before the fight and things become equally the same. So I think that independent, it might be that one fighter wants to jack up. That's how they fight. Well, we get them jacked up. Maybe the other fighter likes to go out there. Okay, some guys do that. You see them calm. Whatever that seems to be better. The key thing is, Joe, don't try to get them there the night of the fight. Let's program and sequence that in what we call readiness or systematic routine. And you know this from baseball, in advance. And that's going to help, not be the only factor, but help them optimize at least their readiness in regards to managing anxiety. Some are too low, some are too high. Some people, a good example would be, I've seen a lot of people in MMA, they start slow. That's okay. In boxing, you got 12 rounds. In MMA, you got 3. If you're not waking up to round 1.5, you might have given away a round, and there's not a lot of liberty there. Then you only can win 1.5 rounds, right? So some people actually need to be activated and the others need to be brought down. So knowing them and their personality and the way their brain processes and where their neurotransmitters go, if you will, is really, really helpful in how to optimize them pre-fight.
Absolutely. I love that you bring up the routine, and we constantly bring it up because it is important. It's not whether or not you have to make sure all the muscles are warmed up. We know you can move, right? You could stand up and fight, but that routine is, we're setting up, we're trying to come as close to the neuromuscular and neurotransmitter responses that we're going to have up to the fight. And I always said, if you have kids that come in that play baseball, let's just say as a pitcher, and they don't have a routine, I know you're not a disaster, but you're not going in the right direction if you have no idea what to do before a game.
Right.
I've been doing this, and then today I did this, and I pitched better because I did this thing. And you start to realize those things where, not that you have to, but that systematic routine gets you into that mindset.
It does.
I think it's also important to note that I think this is another issue with coaching is, you have the guys, I call them the lights on guys. I've coached lots of kids, could give a crap about practice, about hitting, but you put them in a game, you turn the lights on, it's a 3-2 count, and the kid's going to hit the ball over a wall. But the coach, and I've seen it in minor league baseball, they don't like the athlete because they feel like they don't have mental toughness or they don't have proper mindset. And the whole time I was around all that, I'm like, well, do I want the guy who's banging his head against the dugout wall before the game and screaming? Or do I want the kid who's sitting on the bench like he's waiting for a bus? But if you call his number, he can go in the thing like a Derek Jeter in the 9th inning and get his job done. And I think there's a skewed thing where it's always this whole like rah, 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 screaming and yelling, big, huge personality, big, giant circus, if you will. And everybody needs to be a certain way, right? Not to say, to your point too, with the routine, if you're a pitcher or a fighter and you need to warm up for 10 minutes and that makes you alarming and you come, then let them warm up for 10 minutes. I think it's this constant, we talk about identifying your athlete. You have to understand what they need. Some pitchers I know, they need to warm up 2 hours before the game. I know other ones, they toss the ball back and forth 10 times and they're good to go, but I think it's that understanding. I'm sure it's the same with fighting. Guys that need to get to the arena at 6 a.m, and there's guys that could get there at 6:30 for a 7 o'clock fight and get their hands wrapped and we're ready to go. So I think
no doubt. And the liberty that you have in an individual sport is you can do that, and it is harder in a team sport. Yeah, you don't want the guy totally. Manny Ramirez comes to my mind. The guy was bored at the plate and just hit a home run. Look, he just, well, so, and what you got to do is, you're right. The guy shows up. Now, you don't want him to have total freelance, and you have to say to him nicely, look, I get it. When the time comes, you're there. Can you work with me and be somewhat involved in practice for the sake of the team, right? But your point is well taken. Are you going to yell and scream at them? I don't know, because then they may rebel more. So you actually have to know that. And team sports is delicate because one athlete sees how the other athlete operates, sees how the coach may be treating them differently because they should be, even in how they coach them, and may see that as a sense of neglect for me or favoritism for the other person, right? So that's a really delicate balance. And in terms of team sports, you get that person can just step up there and do it.
Bo Jackson.
The question is, hey, can you help me out here? It doesn't look good that you're just showing up, right? And the same thing would be in a fight sport. Look, we're working hard, right? And you're also a leader here. can you work with me and help lead some of these other guys? And by helping them lead the other guys, they too get better. They get a little bit more accountability. Well, you try to find a role for them that would get them engaged. Maybe it's helping out the other players more. Does every coach get an arrogant guy who's just so great, who doesn't want to be bothered? Of course, that's tough. I'm not saying that. But a lot of the times, too, Ray Longo's done this very well. He's put a lot of the guys as leaders of the classes here, as like Aljamain, who's going to fight tomorrow for the title against Peter Yan. Aljo's great, man. He's a leader. He teaches these young kids. He runs the pro class when he can. You know, he travels a lot. He runs the kickboxing when he can. And what does that do? That perfects him, because we all learn when we're teaching. I don't care who you are. Teaching is learning twice. You go to show something, you show something to someone that you've never done for yourself before and go, wow, I'm going to use that. It just came to you. So, you know, that's the balance. Where do we put the athlete if we can, and where can we put them in a position in which that will optimize their time there, who they are, and maybe leadership potentials, which only inevitably will augment their own performance.
Absolutely. I talked with Lee Taft about that yesterday. Actually, we talked about the best way to learn at a coach or to deal with something you're stressing over with is to have them coach. I mean, I had a kid who was, had some stress, and somebody was like, look, go have him train an 8-year-old. Go have him train a now he's 15, 16 years old. Go have him coach. And I think there is no greater, learning experience than that, because you're taking the information, and if you can get to a point where you can teach it, that means you have an understanding enough of it. And if the other person understands it, that means that you've grasped enough to talk about it. And if they can understand it, now you've got all the points. And then if they can go teach it, now we're doing a good thing. But then on the other side, if you start talking about something and the other person goes, what are you talking about? Now, not only do you have to learn a little bit more and do a better job of explaining, but now we can re-examine kind of what you're doing, in terms of how you're presenting it. And I think that's a great adjustment with, same thing with, we talk about everything going on with these things we've been talking about, right? The lifting, the physical performance, the mental stuff for the coaches listening. Make sure you use them on people and make sure they work, right? I've always been a training guinea pig. Tony, I know you are too with some of the stuff. I find a new thing, right? CrossFit, whatever, I do it. Not that I embrace it, but if I do CrossFit for a month and my back kills me and my knees hurt, I'm like, okay, not that this is bad or good, but maybe it's something that I shouldn't teach. Or the same thing with the stuff we talked about, overspeed eccentrics, right? Everybody watches Louis Simmons, or they read about the Russians, Bert Shishyansky, all those scientific people. But if you don't put people through them, you don't know what's going to happen. Because if you listen to a Louis Simmons podcast, they'll tell you about bands. They put too much band tension and a guy would disappear into the ground and they'd be like, oops, too much band. But the point is that with that principle of teaching, which is amazing, and I'm thankful you brought it up, is that you have to understand fully what you're doing, especially in the performance world. You have to know what the stuff feels like. You have to put yourself in situations, because if you've never worked out, you've never been a part of a sport, not to say you have to play the sport, but if you've never been in a competition or a do or die situation, you really can't tell an athlete what it's like to step in the cage after somebody pops them in the face within 10 seconds. And then I'm supposed to regroup, calm down, come back out them. Same thing with baseball. If you don't know what it's like, you come in the bottom of the ninth and you're a rookie and it's your first day and a guy hits a ball 600 feet in the parking lot, and now you got to come back and strike out 2 more people. Those are the variables we talk about, that being able to, relate to your athletes the best you can. And that's where that immersion comes from.
Absolutely. And yes, it's an immersion, and it's the understanding, I think too, Joe, that, I don't really like the terms expert.
Nope.
I don't like the term master, for example, because the best quote I've heard is, you're a master when you refuse to stop learning, right? An expert refuses to stop learning. And the beautiful thing about coaching is it's learning twice, and it's learning more about the skills, about the sport that you're trying to help someone in. And it's learning more about how you can better help them, learning more tools that will help them, understanding the sport in ways you didn't before. So that's all we can do. I mean, as coaches, you're going to get a little messy at times. Things are not, you're going to do everything to the best of your capacity. And we know it doesn't work, but we understand that is the yin and the yang, the nature of how the universe works, or the arbitrary nature of something. But the understanding of it's not easy. What might be best for this athlete at this point in time? That is another thing. It may not be the same in 2 weeks. So moving in and out, jabbing, ebb and flowing, listening though. So that's really the thing, is I just try to listen a lot, because they're going to tell me what they need or what they're capable of, not only by me watching that day. So yeah, you might say, oh, I don't want to be friends with an athlete, but casual conversation and finding out what's going on in their life beyond just how their sparring or their skill session went, or their practice at football, can be important, because it's going to give us a global picture of just where their mindset is in their sport. So it's not easy. I mean, we want a system, right? Because if we have a system, the system is always there. We can always fall back on it. We want a system that we say is proven. And there are systems that are pretty efficacious and work quite often. The question is not that. I would say this about coaching. Somebody said this once. I used to work when I lived in Texas in a youth ministry, and it was great. I was in the church because I loved working with the kids. But here's a great line that refers to everything: coaching, sports, life. And the line is, it references like your faith, but it says spiritual maturity is not how well you're doing. It's how well you're doing.
Thank you for watching.
When you're
Please
not
remember
doing
to
well.
subscribe and follow us on Instagram at
me,
Strength
that's
Coach
brilliant,
Experience,
right?
for all the latest updates
Pitcher
on the
mound
podcast.
doesn't have it.
Thank you.
But they give you 3 runs over 7 and you're in the game and they battle. Sometimes that's what we have to do with the coach as a coach. The athlete isn't doing well that day. That's okay. How well are they doing when they're not doing well probably means more. And we have to help them to be doing well when they're not doing well. That's what a coach does. But that may just mean more than how well they're doing when everything goes perfect. That's the art of coaching, probably. It's my guess and my best assessment, to help them be able to do well when things aren't going well, because otherwise they're going to be fine. They're going to be fine. When everything comes together, anyone's good. It's when it's not coming together that makes where we can make even a bigger difference.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. You know, those situations that you talk about, or having that protocol, if you will, is just a baseline. You know, it's almost like it's a dock in the middle of the ocean, right?
Exactly.
We swim out to one side in unopened, uncharted water. If it gets too, dodgy, we can come back.
Right.
If one side has nothing there, we go to the other side, but it serves as a base. And I think that's a radiating point you bring up, and anybody listening, is you need to have a system, and not that's your end all be all. And I love the fact about hate experts in mastery. So do I, because yes, 10,000 hours works for neurological skill in moving, but in terms of psychologically being able to address a point or to change somebody's ideology of thinking when their brain chemistry is geared to go another way.
Thank you for watching. Please remember
infinity.
to subscribe and
It's
follow us
all
on
about
Instagram at Strength Coach Experience
It's
for
all
all the
about
latest weekly
word
updates on the
choice,
podcast.
getting to know them, understanding their mannerisms. I mean, there's so much going on. So I think, again, with those numbers, it's almost like, I got to 10,000 hours, I'm better now. And to your point with the systems, it's a constant growing thing. And I think along with everything we've been talking about, if you want to be a coach, you have to understand it's your entire life from the first day that you told somebody how to do something till you're done. We're always learning. And if you don't do that, you're going to fail. It doesn't matter how great your system is, because 10 years later, it's not going to be there if you don't follow the science. And before, you were talking about, teaching that preparation, right? The reason why John Wooden, in my opinion, is one of the greatest coaches who's ever lived is because he taught the guys, grown men, how to put their socks on, how to live life, how to answer people, how to go about everything they did with an attitude of, right, move fast but don't hurry, right? All these little things that are so much bigger than the basketball court. But what he was doing was he was putting them in a psychological area or a mental state before games that allowed them to calm down. But then when they got into the games, he didn't interfere with anything they did. He had them put their socks on. He had them line up a certain way. He had them do everything methodically. But then in the game, you go do what I know that you can do because I recruited you to do this, and I'm not going to change, right? I think one of the best examples is with Lou Alcindor. They outlawed dunking, not because of him in quotation marks, and he was all mad about it. And John Wooden very gingerly went up to him and he said, Lewis, when you get to the NBA, I guarantee you will not forgotten of how to dunk.
Yes.
And let him go.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. He had some, he is a good coach to study. He had some of the best lines ever. One of my favorite being, nobody's defeated until they blame someone else. Huge line, relevant in every area in life. And they have a system, right? But yet they'll make their adjustments. I think one of the things and I'm not a great football coach, let me take that back. I'm not a football coach. I've helped out, but look, what does a good coach do? They don't always play a 4-3 or a 3-4. They play to what the players they have. Sometimes you got to do that. Your system might be on defense a 3-4, right? Whatever. But the people you have at that time, it may work better in a 4-3, right? And there are still principles and elements of how you coach that defense that are part of that system. But that small adjustment or that adjustment has to be made. You work to your athlete at times, and you take the athlete's strengths and weaknesses, and you try to make them stronger, right? Even further the strength and tighten up what may be a weakness. It may be completely different than what you're working with another person. So it's in that capacity where you just want to be able to see what is the greatest physical need, what is the greatest mental need, and what could I best work with immediately that may help long-term performance. I think that is the art. Sometimes we guess wrong. We don't always get it right. Sometimes we think this is a quality that may be most demanding. And in a fight, the fight didn't go that way, even though we worked it. These are going to happen. But in everything we do, that type of malleability and that ability just to read.
Thanks for watching. Please remember to subscribe and follow us on Instagram at Strength Coach Experience for all the latest updates with the podcast.
Know when to drop one of the linemen back, right? Just that's what we're really doing here. So the principles in strength and conditioning are there, no doubt. We have great movements that work. We have strength exercises that help. No one's saying throw them away. What we're saying is what are a couple of things we can do to potentially augment that? Not just augment the stretch shortening cycle, the relationship between a Golgi and the spindle, okay? But what can we do to augment, most important in some cases, that athlete's belief in that what we are doing will make them better at what they're doing. That's a big part. They get it, I got to be stronger. But how is being, and they make an inherent assumption. But I think where we can really elaborate as a performance coach that uses, some basic mental skill training is here's what we're doing. Here's the physical quality it builds. But here's how it's going to translate to your skill. Here is when it's going to translate to your skill. And here is how your skill is going to be able to outskill the other guy because we did this. And that adds breadth into our program too. It brings it more alive and is no longer just a bunch of numbers. I'm stronger. Yeah, you're stronger, and here's what's going to happen because you're stronger. This kick, this submission, this punch, this takedown are going to be now. Are they going to be completely different? Of course not. Skill takes precedent, but we are changing the nature of what you can do by what we're doing with you now. That to me is a very important part of our art and our ability to translate performance training into something more than just physical qualities being augmented. And to your point, getting them in a favorable mindset so we don't spend time with serotonin, whatever it is, noradrenaline, or the dopamine in all the wrong places.
Yep, exactly. Putting them in those positions that best fits the mental system and everything else. Because without that, we've talked about everything will either suffer or flourish.
There it is, right? And sometimes with everything right.
That too, yep.
With everything right, it doesn't always work. We have to accept that. So, that's part of the game. If there's only one way to lose, don't play. Mm-hmm. And that's why I don't condemn athletes or sit back. I mean, if an athlete is completely whining and crying and, they're making 150 million and they're just a little overboard, I get it. But people have bad days at work, Joe, and nobody has a camera on them. And there are no commentators.
It's not a glorified bad day, exactly. Oh,
and there's
100%.
And there's no replay,
yep.
Right? They sitting at their desk. They can make a major mistake, okay? Nobody's filming it. Nobody's going over in the replay, and nobody's talking about it on sport radio the next day.
Absolutely. I bring it up all the time. Yep.
When you
Bryce Harper.
Yeah, you sit in the chair and go, I wouldn't do that. Well, you did do that. You're just forgetting you did that at work, and nobody was there to tell you did that.
Yep, exactly.
So we get there. What we do is, appreciate these kids for who they are and just try to help them in the best ways we can in a multitude of ways. We're going to fail. We're going to learn. We're going to bob and weave. We're going to try new things. But if most of the time we can get a better performance, we're doing our job. That's it. Most of the time, can I get a little bit better performance? If we've done that physically and mentally, you're doing a good job.
Yep. No, absolutely. I said it all the time. People don't sign up for Little League so they can be nice to fans and hug people, and they sign up so they can get sponsored and make millions of dollars. Same thing with, I bring it up all the time. I don't like Bryce Harper. I said, well, if you had a camera in your face since you were 12 years old, eventually you would stop caring and do whatever you want.
Exactly.
Now, I'm not saying I agree with everything. I don't agree not hustling to get back at your pitcher and those things, but you're right. It's a thing where there's a camera in your face, and this thing that athletes are normal people that are born with a genetic gift do something at an extremely high level that we can't even fathom. And I use this all the time. People say, well, what about, I want to do this. I said, well, look at basketball. Let's just take it in general. I said, if you play basketball, let's just say you're a normal player on the courts at home, around your house, wherever you live. In terms of an NBA player, they can go out any day of the week and do exactly what they do on television with no practice or anything at any given moment on that court. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with baseball. Pete Alonso can hit a ball 500 feet without trying, with a big smile on his face. And I think it's that understanding of they are made to do these things. I always talk about them like they're like Marvel characters on comic books, right? They don't exist. They're in their own other world. But it's also, to augment that, they're normal people. And you have to understand that just because they throw 100 miles an hour doesn't mean they're happy. I know handfuls of players who hate baseball. They get drafted in the first round. I'm sure you know fighters, knockout power, all the tools and the tricks. They don't like fighting. They're not violent, or they don't have any fun doing it.
Yep.
And I think once that's understood, especially with coaching, and I hate when, it happened to me when I was in there too, when the pro guys come in, oh, don't talk to so-and-so, or you have to be nicer. I'm like, why? he's a normal dude. His uniform's just different than the minor league guy.
Okay, exactly.
You know?
Exactly. You know, and you're right. So it's a balance there too. Here we go back to it, right? You want to appreciate what they're doing. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I support everybody's attitude. I mean, they're lucky, and they are lucky no matter how hard they work, because that's what I think would keep people humble. You're still lucky.
Mm-hmm.
You could have played basketball in high school and broke your ankle, even though you would have been the best, and never been the same. So you still need some luck. And by doing that, I think it keeps you humble. And I think it keeps you humble as a coach, because you do everything you can. And certainly when doing everything right, it increases the chances that you're going to get that outcome that you want. But you still need, at times, a little bit of luck.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you have a game plan and it's pouring sideways, and that significantly impacts your athletes. That's a little bit of bad luck, right? Doesn't mean you can't win, but in everything we do, I think there would be a little bit of humility. And I'm not talking about athletes, I mean even as coaches, because this is why I never get arrogant or confident, if you will. could be confident that we did everything we could. Can't always be confident in an outcome. I mean, you can believe you're going to win, but you got to be, prepared to know that anything can happen. And what is a good coach, or how do you make yourself happy? Give your athlete the best you have at that moment, the best you have at every moment. Keep learning for them. Keep trying to make them, in the end, believe in who they are. This is why I teach and I coach, because I want people to believe in who they are and what they're going to do in life. Because it's a really bad place to be if you don't believe in yourself in anything. I'm not talking about even sport, your ability to go to finish college, to ever be something, to ever achieve anything. To me, there's nothing more horrible. And the most horrible thing you can do is tell someone that and victimize them. I would say I'm going to close today because I got some coaching to do right now. But you and I talked about it. I think you saw this. Please watch the Netflix series called Playbook with Coach Doc Rivers. What an amazing man and episode. And his parents taught him something that for me it will resound forever. And here's a man who did undergo discrimination. He did undergo racism. He's older. It was really bad. Okay. He was in the South. He's 70 years old. So he's 15 when you still had segregation in some states. So this man knows. But his message, no matter what happens, never allow yourself to be a victim. As a coach, as a player, because it's a concession of defeat, and it's a concession that things can't get better. And as a coach or an athlete, if we do that, Joe, mentally, physically, then we never have a chance of removing ourselves from the very place we're in at that time.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. For anybody, definitely watch that series. That one is amazing.
Great.
They also have one with Serena Williams. They also have one with a soccer coach.
Oh, wonderful.
Amazing coach at South Carolina women's basketball. How she pretty much single-handedly, put the team on the map. Yep. So anybody watching, Tony, I know you got to go, but just to reiterate, anybody watching, definitely a great series to watch, and definitely something to watch, because it literally breaks down these coaches, and they all have something different. Serena Williams' coach is amazing. The guy for Ronaldo is amazing, right? Doc Rivers, great story. And then we rounded out with the woman from South Carolina. So to do that, listen to the 3 episodes and watch that Netflix documentary. And I think you'll be in a good spot to undergo coaching career.
Yeah. I agree with you. Patrick Aratoglu, who said, he didn't make it as a pro, and he wanted to make sure other people did and learned how to coach. And he said he was at a point where he could see what his athletes were thinking.
Yep.
talk about getting to know each person. So, no, this is wonderful, Joe. Your coaching series is fantastic, and I look forward to coming back, my friend, and we'll keep going. Whatever you want to chat about, Sports Sci SCI or Sports Sci PSY. Either way, we can do it.
Absolutely, Tony. Definitely we'll have you back. I appreciate it always. Wonderful, wonderful conversations. And enjoy the rest of your day. And for everybody listening, I'll put down all his stuff. And if you want to contact him, everything will be right there on the Instagram. And again, Tony, thank you so much for coming on. Always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Enjoyed it, Joe. Talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Strength Coach Experience for all the latest updates on the podcast. Thank you.